Hey guys, it's Libby. Welcome to my Torathon vlog. It's about 4:30 on Friday, and I have done all of the things that I need to do for today, which means I get to start reading. So I've got All Systems Red queued up on my laptop. Allons-y. It is now the afternoon of Saturday, and I am done with All Systems Red and Artificial Condition, and I really liked them. So these are the two currently published novellas in the Murderbot Diaries series, and this is a intergalactic sci-fi situation where Murderbot is a rogue android that's the security unit for a research mission to a deserted planet. Rogue android sounds kind of scary, but Murderbot mainly just wants to sit around and watch TV shows and not have to interact with people because that's weird. Reading a book from Murderbot's perspective is kind of like reading a whole book from the perspective of Marvin from the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy series, except where Marvin is depressed and nihilistic, Murderbot is socially awkward and has an inferiority complex. And it also is an action hero. And for the first half of the book, it didn't seem like there was a lot of plot going on, and I was like, okay, the story that exists is just like a vehicle for the voice of Murderbot, which is great. But then, starting at the halfway point, like, things started to happen, and I was like, oh my, is this a plot? I am intrigued. And then the ending was just so great. So it went up, as I was reading, from like a solid 4 to like, this is a 4.5 to nope, 5 stars. I can't really tell you anything about Artificial Condition without spoiling the end of All Systems Red. But I also liked it a lot. It was only 4 stars though. I think it wasn't quite as, I didn't feel quite as much joy throughout the process, but it's still very good. So now that I'm done with my 2 longer things, I'm gonna start cranking through the short stories on the website, starting with Joan Aiken's The Cold Flame. So you seem to talk about that. Well, I've read The Cold Flame, and now I think I need to read both a biography of Emily Bronte and possibly Paradise Lost, because there's something going on. There's something going on in this short story, but I don't get it. It's definitely a sort of highly allegorical retelling of an event in the life of the Bronte family, with a bit of sort of light necromancy, but set in the modern day. Yeah. Did anyone understand this? It was definitely enjoyable to read, and I wish I knew enough to know what Joan Aiken was doing. I gave it 4 stars, I guess. I liked the sentence level writing, and it's certainly intriguing. Now I'm moving on to another Joan Aiken, Reading in Bed. Just finished Reading in Bed by Joan Aiken. What did you think of it?
I thought it was pretty good, all things considered. It was less ambitious, I think, than I thought it was going to be. Also, for me, this was the first story I had read.
Yeah.
So I was expecting...
David has read all of them
Yes.
before, and I'm grabbing him as I read them one by one.
I was expecting more tour magic, so to speak. Some sort of bigger twist. But I didn't think it was a bad story, and I don't think a bigger twist would have necessarily made it actually better.
Yeah, she writes, I think her writing is very sort of charming, but it's about a Polish officer who has a fever dream.
It's, one of these magical realist situations where...
Or did he?
I would say the thing that I think I leave feeling a little disappointed because, it was very much a fairy tale. It's a short story, very fantastical, potentially... a metaphor for something, hard to say exactly.
Got some old school Catholic vibes going on.
And there's nothing wrong with that. But it kind of lacked a clear moral.
Yeah.
There's not really a conclusion that it leaves, and that's arguably the saving grace of the fairy tale as a genre. It's kind of an old Greg story, where the moral is that
Old Greg.
Small fishing villages and dark lakes at nights are not usually very pleasant places to be. And that's basically all there really is to the story. Although I guess the officers need to be making a pretty good time of it.
That wasn't really a time so much as an exposure.
Yeah, well. I think the part of the story I enjoyed the most was hearing the description of the officer in the beginning.
Yeah.
He seemed kind of an interesting guy, and it was kind of interesting to hear about, he was kind of in some imperfect situations in a few ways, but he was trying to make the best of it.
Yeah, so I think I'm going to give it 3 stars, but it's a pleasant 3 stars.
Yeah. And it was pretty short.
Yeah.
It didn't ask a lot of you. It was well written. The rhetoric, or whatever appropriate term is, the prose. Was good, and it was a pleasant story, if a little directionless, maybe.
Okay, so the next one I'm reading is The Art of Space Travel, which you are not joining me on, right?
I don't believe so, no.
Okay, I want my own for that. So I will see you guys now. So, Nina Allen's The Art of Space Travel. It's about, it's set in the near future, later in the 21st century. And it's about a woman who is the head housekeeper of an elite hotel in Heathrow, the London suburb with the big airport in it. And she is preparing for the arrival of 2 astronauts who are about to go on the, hopefully the first successful Mars mission. Hi, Nova. There's already been an unsuccessful Mars mission in this timeline. I think Nova wants dinner. You already have dinner. And simultaneously, she's trying to take care of her mom, who has dementia, and also figure out who her father is, because her mom never told her. All of this sounds good, and I liked the actual story when we talked about the actual story, but this was really bloated. It was a novelette, and it could have been a short story, because there were several times where we were just talking about other random things. Like, I did not need to know about the building projects that the previous owner of her house had carried out. And I did not need to know about what would happen if the reporters that are there to cover the astronauts accidentally saw a rat in the kitchens, and then that's what all the news stories were about how dirty their hotel was. And the frustration that built up at having to read those parts made the actual plot sections less enjoyable. So I give this like a 2.5 stars, but I feel like you could have edited it very easily into a 4-star read. So that's a little disappointing. I'm going to take a bit of a break, and later on this evening I'm going to come back to what's next. I think we're starting all the Charlie Jane Anders ones. So I will go back to 6 months, 3 days. So I have just finished the Hugo Award-winning novelette 6 months, 3 days, and I did not like it at all. It's set in modern-day New York and New England, and our main characters are Doug and Judy, both of whom can see the future, but there's a little bit of discussion about how exactly this all works. But Doug can see the definite future, what's definitely going to happen, and Judy can see what the results will be of various actions should she choose to take them. They get into a relationship which they know will end in 6 months with a catastrophic fight, but they will be happy for a little bit before then, so they decide to go for it. Most of the story is just the 3 characters that there are in the whole thing going to a place and talking about their relationship. Either Doug and Judy are talking, or Judy is talking to her roommate. And the plot is, I guess, fine. It maybe could have been done well. To be honest, I didn't really understand the end, and if I cared, I'd read the last couple paragraphs 3 or 4 times and try to figure it out, but I don't care, because I could not handle the writing style. It reminded me of an experience I had when I was a substitute teacher. So I don't really like little kids, so normally I was only subbing for like 9-year-olds and above, 3rd grade and up. But sometimes I'd show up and they'd need me to cover like a 1st grade or a kindergarten class. And one time I did this, and I think I was like getting them to answer math questions, that I was writing the questions on the board and writing down their answers. And we started out the lesson with the kids sitting on the carpet in front of me. And then gradually, as they got more excited about the answers, it's good to be excited about math, children, but they would like stand up And then gradually they started getting closer and closer to me until I had just like this sea of 5-year-olds all around me. And I was like, kids, back up. Mrs. S needs her personal space. And reading this book felt like that. There's just so much to the words. I simultaneously felt like there was too much dialogue and also too much description. There was just too much of everything. I'll read the first couple sentences to you, and when I read these to myself, I was like, wow, this is bad. But there's one at Hugo, and a lot of people really like it, so surely it's gonna, either this is a fluke and it's gonna change and get better, and Charlie Jane Andrews was just trying to catch my eye with some overdone writing, or something, but it's just all like this. It's all like this. So here's how we start. Judy is nervous but excited, keeps looking at things she spotted out of the corner of her eye. She's wearing a floral Laura Ashley-style dress with an ankh necklace, and her legs are rambunctious, her calves moving under the table. It's distracting, because Doug knows that in 2.5 weeks those cucumber-smooth ankles will be hooked on his shoulders, and that curly reddish-brown hair will spill everywhere onto her lemon floral pillows. Did anyone think that was good? How do people think that is good? So I gave this 2 stars. So I'm gonna now move on to Margot and Rosalind, which is very short, and David also read it. But if it's not like totally blowing me away, I'm gonna X out all of the other Charlie Jane Andrews that I had chosen to read for the Torathon. Oh, it's very disappointing. Okay, Margot and Rosalind by Charlie Jane Andrews. First off, I should mention this was flash fiction written to a prompt. The prompt was, nevertheless she persisted, and Tor published, I think 5? Definitely a couple.
I think it was like 8.
Okay, they published 8.
I think it was 8.
Different flash fictions from different writers on International Women's Day back in 2017. And it is harder to write to a prompt than to write to your own story. Obviously there's not a lot there. It's a little bit confusing. And I think it's about a woman who's creating a hyperbrain, and all of the people, the man, don't want her to attach her brain to it. And I think Charlie Jane Andrews wants us to assume that this is like a good thing, that she is right to want to connect her brain to the hyperbrain, but she never makes an argument for it. So from our perspective as readers, like, it could be totally possible that connecting your brain to a hyperbrain is a bad idea. However, I think is pretty obvious that like not letting women speak when they have a right to speak, or when you are letting men speak, is a bad idea. Hi, Nova.
Hi, Nova.
Nova has a right to speak.
She feels very strongly about this.
And so I feel like you're making an analogy where like one thing is obviously good and the other thing is not obviously good, but you're saying that it is, and that's open for criticism, and therefore the thing you're allegorizing, you're also opening that to criticism unnecessarily. What did you think of the story?
I definitely think there's a lot of value to the point that you're making. Mm-hmm. Of course, it's tricky. You know, I think that you're right, that what the story does is it wants you to just presuppose that it's good, that this person is being unreasonably restricted. And then it explores that concept, which, you know, that's a technique for good or for bad. I would say that what I think I found most disappointing about the story was with the Iceman character, or whatever that was, because what was that? What was going on? That's
Why
kind of
did
an
he come out
interesting
of her
world thing, but
Yeah.
why did it happen this way? What is that supposed to... And I do agree with what some of the point that you're making, that it never really explains why you should care, other than you can just assume because of the title and the context that you kind of, well, it doesn't really matter. That's not what it's about, which is fine. It was a very... if not hard, dense science fiction story. And so if you're someone that doesn't really want to get into explaining why exactly all the world is, then that's fine, but then maybe take a less dense strategy, maybe have fewer characters and technologies that you sort of reference and use.
Yeah.
I don't know.
And have emerged from kitchen appliances.
Yeah. But, you know, it's, like you say, it's tricky to write from the prompt, especially from a prompt like this where the prompt really kind of gives away the story.
Yeah.
You pretty much know what the key conflict is going to be, which characters are going to be involved in what type of conflict. So either you have to find something that subverts that prompt, which isn't really appropriate in this case, or you have to go along with the prompt, and then, you're...
And 8 other people or 7 other people are also writing to this prompt, so you got to be weird enough that it's not going to be too similar.
Yeah. Well, it's tricky. I think when your prompt is your moral, and when your moral is a subject of significant social controversy, so you can't really play around with it too much, then it's always going to be difficult to come up with a really creative story. It's hard.
Especially in so little space.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I would agree. I didn't really enjoy the story. I thought it was fine. I would have loved to hear more about hyperbrains or what they do, or why people come out of refrigerators, or whatever. It was kind of interesting. It was kind of interesting. But I don't really think it seems like the sum didn't really add up to more than the whole was not more than the sum of its parts, and none of the parts are really that interesting.
Yeah, I think I would give this 2 stars, but with a caveat that it's not really Charlie's fault.
Well, she's the one that took the commission. That's a philosophical question. I'm not sure.
If it gotta make money.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Welcome back to the Charlie Jane Andrews cast. So I've now read the 3 that David has read, which were, what was the first one? Let's go backwards. Intestate, Unfathomable, Sisterhood of Ick, and what was the other one we read? With the time travel.
The one with the time travel.
Then the Cartography of Sudden Death. There we go. So let's start with that one before we forget everything else about it. So actually, before we get to that, I will say that of the 5 Charlie Jane Andrews I've read, each one has gotten better. To the point where Intestate, I was like, this is actually a thing that I could enjoy.
I'd agree with that.
So the Cartography of Sudden Death is... I thought it was, kind of okay. I mainly didn't understand why it existed. How did you feel? Interestingly,
this is the one that I probably came in with the highest expectations for.
Based on the title?
Based on their opening artwork, which I really liked for this piece.
Okay.
I felt very much the target market for this story. I'm pretty sure the story was for me. I really like this type of very socio-political science fiction. It had kind of the right type of world, very extreme, and where you could really see the influence of its technological and otherwise states and how things were working out for the characters. This was a story that I felt like, okay, David's gonna like this story.
Okay.
And I thought it was good. I enjoyed it, but I wouldn't say that I loved it. So even though it was very much targeted at me, I don't think it was amazing or anything.
My main problem with it was that things just sort of seemed to happen, and
that's the plot of the story, unfortunately.
Every sort of 1/5 section of the book doesn't really seem to be relating to all the previous things that have happened. So we start out with a story where apparently a young girl is being abducted and forced into servitude, but that it's okay. And then we switch to her witnessing death at a major political event, and then we shift to everything's about time travel now, and then the last 2/5 are about various things that happen in the time traveling. And I don't know why we needed the first part, or at least for the first part, to be so long in order if Charlie Jane Andrews just wanted to tell this time travel story.
Yeah, I think that the trick of the story is that it's not really about the character's personal journey. And it's not really, because they're traveling through time, it's supposed to be a socio-political study of this world going through different phases in its history, and all about how the characters are skipping through and getting to see the different phases of the history. And that's pretty much the whole story. And so if you're kind of interested in seeing a little society and go through different phases and kind of people skipping around in it, then that might be interesting. But there's not really a lot else to it other than that.
So you did enjoy that part?
I think the part that I enjoyed the most was the opening section, as you said. Just to elaborate, she is being abducted into servitude, but kind of the premise of the story is that apparently this is a whole society where everyone's in servitude to someone else. There's a very hierarchical system where everyone serves people above them and below them, and so I thought it was a little interesting the way they were kind of setting up that society, and I was learning more about it. And then we left that, and they were like, see, and also the society took some kind of slightly different forms, where it did different things in different parts of history. And I think it got less interesting in that part. I think it got less interesting because the different phases of this society's histories were pretty much the same. They were like,
they're all kind of terrible.
It was the kind of, they sort of had an interesting prose technique or whatever, where the characters would be really surprised by the small changes in between the historical periods, whereas to an outside observer they looked very similar, which is, of course, the way people actually do view history. So that was kind of interesting, but that doesn't make for a particularly interesting novel.
Yeah, I think it's a short story. I think, like, if any of the sections that I talked about had been, like, blown up and, like, the whole story was sort of like that, I think any particular one of those could have been better. And then the thing that I had a problem with was that I did not buy the time travel mechanic. So time travel, some people, or possibly all people, I think all people, but you have to know how it works, can time travel when there is the death of an important person. And it is the accidental death or the sudden death? The sudden death.
Unexpected death.
Yeah, of an important person. So, and the reason that this allows you to time travel is because this, like, causes ripples in space-time, blah, 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 whatever. And so you can sort of hop through time. And the reason it causes these ripples is that, like, suddenly all sorts of futures have to change. And we know for certain that, like, lots of not important people dying does not do this. And I just don't believe that, like, important people unexpectedly dying affects history in ways that are meaningfully different from, like, other things that can happen suddenly and meaningfully affect history, but are not people dying.
Yeah, the one of the main characters of the story is apparently the scientist who has figured out how this technique works. So, I guess the way I kind of read it was like, it's a very poorly understood technique, and so it has to be sort of calibrated just right, so it requires a single super important, but I agree, it doesn't really add up that well, and it wasn't that compelling. What I really would have liked to see would be the story to take on some different structure. Either, we have this sort of our real protagonist that we follow throughout the story, and like you say, we have kind of this big section where we get to know the protagonist, and then we have this crazy section where things start happening, but then the story, I felt like, kind of suddenly ended after that. I could have done with less opening, maybe less twists and turns in the middle, and then maybe a sort of symmetrical closing chapter where we got to see, okay, after all this wildness and after all these crazy events that this character went through, how was their life actually really different as a result? That might have mirrored kind of what the story was about a little bit more.
And we spent all this time getting to know this character at the beginning, to then in the endy bits, she is just like a person who doesn't understand what's going on that another character can explain things to, so that we understand. The
ending of the story is basically the character being left with, well, now something really interesting is going to happen to you next. I wonder what it will be. It could be anything now that you've time traveled. It could be anything. And that's not really that satisfying. Or instead, if that's not what the author really wanted to do, then maybe you have a much shorter opening section and just have lots of more people moving through time. It was kind of interesting the way we were chasing people around through time, and it's interesting enough, maybe not, but make the story about that, and then follow these different characters and have that be your core intrigue. Maybe you still have in-world protagonist that you have them for an opening and closing chapter, but really just make it about the traveling through time, because I wasn't really satisfied with where the characters ended. It didn't really feel like a real journey, and the time travel stuff was always sort of glossed over and tried to run over as quickly as possible to avoid getting into all the boring technical details that
David would have loved.
That I would have loved, that it also wasn't satisfying.
Yeah. So this is a 2 stars, kind of disappointing. I think maybe
I think it's better than 2 stars, but
maybe like a 2.25. Okay, next one is the Unfathomable Sisterhood of Ick. So slightly better. We're taking a step up every time. So this is near future science fiction when there's various different technologies going on, which are not meaningfully changing the way people live. The one that is important to this story is you can basically it's a pensieve, like from Harry Potter. You can extract some of your memories, which look like a little wisp that you put in a box. I didn't realize this when I was reading it, but now I'm like, wait, it's literally the pensieve from Harry Potter. And then you carry around in a little box, and other people can put this into their heads and then have the memories from whoever's head the memories were taken from. I thought the core thing that the story actually, I think, wanted to be about was very interesting. So we start off, again, the opening section was too long, considering that that's not actually what the story is about. So we open with a couple who are sort of breaking up, and after the breakup, hi.
Computer.
Oh, okay. After the breakup, the woman goes and talks to a friend, and a friend convinces her to use this technology to get her boyfriend's memories of when they first met, so that she can potentially give them to future boyfriends, so they will like already know what kind of tofu she likes and how to kiss her and stuff. But then it turns out that this friend actually wants to put the memories into her own head, because, at least reportedly because, our protagonist, our main lady, was in a long-term relationship for like 6 years, and this friend has always been in like short-term relationships that she didn't really care about, and she just sort of wants to know what it's like to really be in love. But as you can imagine, this messes her up psychologically quite a bit. So what did you think of this story?
I think the most striking thing about the story is how similar it is to Black Mirror. I'm certainly not accusing the author of...
any episodes of Black Mirror.
It's not like Black Mirror invented this.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the most important thing to communicate to someone else that hasn't read the story is, this is like a Black Mirror thing. It's like a Black Mirror thing. So, okay, that's fine. I thought that it was a pretty good story. I thought that probably the biggest weakness of the story was that the actual product and its supposed intended use didn't really make any sense.
Mm-hmm.
Like, no one wants your ex-boyfriend's memories stuffed in their brain and then you'll learn how they like things. No, that's not a thing. No one wants that. No one would want that. No one would want to do that. No one would want to take it.
Apparently one person wants it.
Apparently one person did. Just the thing, like, that's something that you're like, that's not, yeah, its intended use did not really make any sense. So, it was, I could definitely tell that was not
I can't
what
remember.
it was actually used
Was
for.
it being marketed for that use, or was the
don't
friend
really know.
just saying
That's
do
a
it
good
for
point.
this reason?
A good point.
Yeah.
I think that this was, I liked a lot of the world building in this. I really liked how they used biochemistry. You know, the main character is the biochemist, and they use that, her knowledge of biochemistry to really character her interactions with people and the way she thinks about things very interestingly and accessibly. And I really liked their smart cookie thing. They did a good job with them. Like, and in the beginning I was just like, oh, they've put in some buzzword, smart cookie. But then you start to realize, well, smart cookies are like a technology that people make, and they're made out of chemicals, and you eat them and they make you smarter, meaningfully smarter. And you start to realize...
And you gotta keep eating them.
Yeah. And you start to realize that the characters are actually doing all of these, like, very impressive, very strange, and theoretically impossible things. Like, oh, they could only do these because of all the smart cookies they're eating. And the way that they explain this and reveal it and integrate it with the story, I thought was really good. So that was something that I really liked about the stories that I didn't like so much from some of the earlier ones by the same author. And I thought that the ultimate sort of psychological drama that they got in was pretty compelling and pretty interesting and meaningful. They were talking about some important things, and I think had some good analysis of the story and the interpersonal interactions. So, you know, those are the two main things that the story was trying to do, and I thought it did a good job with them. So I was like, hey, pretty good.
Yeah.
Pretty good. It was a little long. I agree. The opening section was a little bit too long. Well, maybe a little bit too long. I know another case of the characters sort of chasing each other around, a little bit too many circles of that. But, you know, it's a forgivable sin. And again, the resolution is that the characters just sort of decide to be nice to each other.
Yeah,
that just works better. That's fine.
The conclusion was not really satisfying. They just sort of, what if we just decided to do the solution?
Eventually,
what if there was a pretty obvious solution and we did it?
Eventually, the problem kind of wears off, and if you're just relaxed about it, it'll solve itself. Turns out to be the answer, which is, fine because the story's about ready to end, but is not actually very satisfying. Yeah. But a good story and some good science fiction.
So that was a 3 stars from Libby. You haven't been giving star ratings. Do you wish to?
I would have given the previous one 3.25 stars.
Okay.
And I would also give this one 3.25 stars.
Really?
Yeah. I really, again, the last one, I don't think it was an amazingly written story, but that was very much, I'm the target market for that story. That's why it's just no way around it.
So last one, Intestate. The best one that Libby read. Also the least science fiction-y. It's almost not science fiction. There is some advanced medicine probably going on. So this could be happening like 10 years in the future. And it's mainly not about that. It's mainly about a giant family reunion with like 30, 40 people there, and like all different ages of children, and everyone's running around being crazy. And the patriarch of this family, he has like modified himself in various ways, and the family is sort of talking but not talking about who's going to get which of his body parts when he dies, which of his modified body parts. So we liked it.
Yeah, it was good.
You give it 4 stars?
I think that's 4 stars.
Yeah. I finished 3 more short stories. They were The Virtual Swallows of Hog Island and Mental Diplopia by, which one was that? Julianna, Baggott? Julianna Baggott. And A Rumor of Angels by Dale Bailey. And I waited until I'd read all 3 of these to film a new clip because I don't have that much to say about them. Virtual Swallows of Hog Island is set in the very near future, and our narrator is a man who is a coder and creates virtual realities for like psychiatric use. People are doing a sort of combination of like Jungian and CBT, and he doesn't particularly like the therapist that he works with / for, and also he and his wife are having difficulty getting pregnant. She keeps having miscarriages. Then Mental Diplopia is a very gentle apocalyptic story where people are dying from a very highly infectious disease. The only symptom of it is that for several weeks before you die, you are seeing the real world as it currently is, but you are hearing, smelling, touching, and tasting your childhood. And then A Rumor of Angels is about a 15-year-old boy living in America during the Dust Bowl, and he manages to get a ride on a truck going west where there is a rumor of angels. And all of these have a perfectly decent premise, which they execute with competent writing, but without any particularly deep insight or noticeable twists. And so they're all about 3 stars. That's kind of all I have to say about them. Okay, now I'm going to read Mrs. Sorensen and the Sasquatch. So there's like a 5% chance that I'm about to read Bigfoot porn. Wish me luck. Good news! It was not Bigfoot porn. So I've finished Mrs. Sorensen and the Sasquatch, which David also read.
Correct.
David, your thoughts?
I thought that it was pretty good. Definitely carried the story pretty well. Mm-hmm. The one part that I was a little disappointed about was when I initially realized that there was like this bigger long-term drama that we were sort of led into between the protagonist and the Sasquatch. Mm-hmm. That it wasn't, when I first realized that was a little bit too much of a stretch for me. Mm-hmm. The story didn't quite make sense in some ways. Mm-hmm. I didn't quite understand what the relationship is between Sasquatches and humans. Mm-hmm. Like, is this... Because humans apparently have, they've been living in this area of what is apparently modern America for a long time.
Or possibly Scandinavia.
Yeah.
There are a lot of Scandinavian names.
That's a good point. Maybe it's Scandinavian. It's hard to say.
They celebrate Thanksgiving, though, which I think definitely points
and the Sasquatch is an American creation. So they've been living there for a long time, and people know about Sasquatches, but there seems to be a very insufficiently resolved set of social conventions between humans and Sasquatches.
Yeah, well, similar to that, I was confused that, like, there's all these Sasquatch sightings going on, and people are seeing Sasquatches. But then when people see Mrs. Sorensen's Sasquatch, they're like, it's like a giant bear drinking wine, but it doesn't quite look like a bear. And I'm like, you've seen a Sasquatch.
People know that Sasquatches, like, have a language.
Uh-huh.
They reference that very early in the story. But the priest, when someone asked him if Sasquatches could be baptized, he's like, well, it's just no one's ever asked, and I can't ask. And it's like, I think if there was like a whole species of apparently intelligent creatures, someone, I don't know, we probably would have asked some of this stuff. Also, like, the priest is apparently a member of a high church. He appears to be a member of an order, and
he does confession, so he's presumably Catholic? Are there Protestant groups who do confession?
Let's say he's Catholic.
Okay.
So he's Catholic, so he doesn't want to ask his bishop, maybe, about what the right approach to this was. Like, the core part of the story, once I realized the story was not, oh, the Sasquatches have arrived and what's going to happen, it's like, no, Sasquatches are like a whole thing, which is sort of needed to carry the story forward. I think you should just ask the bishop and, like, tell them, like, they're intelligent and maybe you could work something out. I don't know. Not sure. So that part left me a little unsatisfied. But the story was well written.
Yeah. It's high on the charm.
Mm-hmm.
Just don't think about it too hard.
Yeah. But it is very charming. And it was nice to see someone go through a real emotional journey in a short story without there being a lot of, like, emotional exposition. Just by a story being told and being able to watch the characters.
Do you mean the priest going through an emotional journey?
The priest went through an emotional journey.
I think he is the main character. I think we spend the most time with him. I don't know. It's pretty evenly split between him and Mrs. Sorensen.
It's hard to say exactly whose perspective the story is told from. Like, you sort of get the feeling, and I kind of agree with you, that, like, the whole story is told from the priest's perspective, and even the things that the priest doesn't know about, what the priest isn't present for, we only hear about because the priest hears about them secondhand. So maybe you're right. It's hard to say, but I think a lot of it. I think the lovers both go through a pretty meaningful emotional story. I guess the Sasquatch less so, but the female does. I don't know. I think that it's. I felt like there was a real emotional, more emotional weight to this than the other stories that I've read in this part of this readathon. I felt connected to it. So that was nice.
That's our vote. Very nice. I gave it 4 stars.
That's generous, but it's not.
Yeah, it mainly for feels good.
Yeah, if that's what you're there for.
Yeah. So now transitioning to wrapping things up. Did you enjoy Torathon, babe?
It was definitely it was informative. I haven't.
Is this the most fiction reading you've done?
Yeah, that's what I was about to say. I haven't read this much fiction, for a long time, years. So that I sat down for, 4 or 5 hours and just read entertainment. Was just that's not something I've done in a long, long time. So it was kind of interesting. I was like, oh yeah, I used to do this. I remember books and stuff. Yeah, that was fun. And some of the stories were interesting. And I've been pretty disconnected from, science fiction, literary world for a long time. So it's kind of interesting to see how some things had changed. I like Tor a lot as a company. I think they're really good. One of my favorites. So that's why I was excited when I heard about your idea. So I wasn't surprised that I did find a lot of it interesting. I don't feel like I had any moments of, like, grand inspiration, which is, kind of what I guess you'd hope to pull from exposure to another type of media.
I didn't read any 5-star reads here.
And there weren't even any moments where I was like, oh, I could make this into a really interesting game, or, this really is a great way to explain something.
Most importantly, Libby is now 14 books ahead of schedule on her Goodreads challenge.
Strategy.
And that's what this is really about.
Strategy.
I hope you guys had fun, and I'll see you next time.